Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the public. Welcome to this panel meeting of the Spd Committee in North Somerset Council. My name is John Crockford-Hawley. I'm the chairman of the meeting. Let us commence then with the business, but before we do, may I remind everybody that this meeting is taking place under the regulations which would apply if we were meeting in the town hall. It will be recorded and it will be available for public broadcast. So just to mention that everybody must be aware that this is a public meeting and we are under public scrutiny. I will respect, as we always do, the normal rules of engagement and courtesy as we proceed through the agenda. First item on the agenda, public discussion. Do we have any?
Chairman, there's no members of the public have indicated they wish to speak.
Yep, thank you. Apologies for absence.
I've received no apologies.
Thank you. Does anyone have any pecuniary interests they feel they ought to disclose? None. Minutes of the last meeting then. Item 4, minutes of the meeting.
Chairman, forgive me, before we do that, could I take the register?
Oh, I do apologise, yes.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you. Councillor Crockford-Hawley?
Well, I'm present, I think, yes.
Councillor Crew?
I'm here.
You, Councillor Bird?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Bridger?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Butte?
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Codling?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Crosby?
Present. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Heverson?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg? I don't see him here, so I'll move on. Councillor James?
Present.
Councillor Keating?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Tucker? I don't see Councillor Tucker here either. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Next item then, item 4, the minutes of the last meeting. We have them on our schedule and paperwork. I'm assuming everybody has read them. Are there any matters which arise from them which are not otherwise on the agenda, or any corrections? Lift a hand. No. Would somebody care to
Move approval, Chairman.
Thank you. Peter has proposed we accept them.
Sorry,
second
Chair.
that. Steve Bridger, thank you.
No.
Anyone against that?
Sorry, Chair, I had a very brief point. I forgot this was a committee where we had to raise our hand. Yes, a quick point on the minutes. I'm marked as present for the last meeting, Chair, and I'm 98% certain I wasn't present. So I think that needs to be changed. We were interviewing for the chief exec for the new waste company. Thank you.
Right, with that amendment, everybody happy?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Okay, let's pass on then to the next item. Item 5, matters referred from the council. You will all remember that at the last meeting of full council, reference was made to the cladding issue on high-rise buildings as pertain particularly in Portishead. If I could report that the Chief Executive Officer will be writing as instructed by council to government, and that response will come back to us. We have been asked then to deal with it, and I would suggest that we establish a task and finish working group between this panel and the ASH panel to make recommendations to officers and the executive to take evidence from residents who might wish to communicate with us and appropriate officers and elected members, and to make recommendations insofar as North Somerset Council has ability to influence the situation back to the executive and officers. Do members generally accord with that?
Agree with that, Chairman.
Okay.
Maybe we can sort that under the work plan.
Yeah. Anybody particularly wish to speak to it? No. Okay then. So we'll get the working party. We'll get the task and finish working party up and running ASAP. Thank you all very much. Right, let's move on to item 6 then, the North Somerset local plan. You all got the paperwork, and for the benefit of those members of the public who might be watching or will watch a recording, I think we need to say at the very beginning that this is not the first opportunity we've had to discuss the local plan. There have been many meetings which have taken place, and I'm very surprised. I'm very pleased the way in which the meetings have been conducted, because with all of the COVID restrictions we've got and the inability to meet real people, I think there's been some really good public engagement, and that's not just with the people we would expect, businesses, but also all of the parishes and the towns, and a goodly number of younger people. And I think from the chair, I'd like to particularly thank the executive member, Councillor Tonkin, for going out of his way to communicate with every parish and town council to ensure that we've had maximum response from them to the local plan, and to Councillors James and Cronley for the at times difficult task of encouraging younger people to respond. And I think that has been remarkably successful. So thank you all very much. Looking through the plan, it does say in the opening words that an approach needs to be taken in selecting preferred spatial strategy and key issues. Could I remind members that we're not actually at this meeting discussing anything which is site specific? So might I dissuade you from standing up saying, oh, in my parish we don't want this and it should go in their parish, because that's not the purpose of today's meeting. So if we could not be site specific. We all know that we have a problem. We are building something like, and Michael Reep will correct me, but we're building something like 808 houses a year in North Somerset. Government wants us to build 1,049, but it's up the game. So we're going to be expected to provide 1,365 houses per annum. And anybody who thinks that we can pull up the drawbridge and say not in our backyard is in cloud cuckoo land. We have got to accommodate this housing, and the task for us right across North Somerset is to find out exactly where. Looking at all of the responses we've had from the public, it does look very much as though people are in favour of certain aspects as to where we should develop, notably brownfield sites, where active travel can be encouraged, where there will be least impact on issues like climate change, where affordability can be best accommodated, and where development is close to existing services, and of course all of which will be in superb design mode, won't it, as we hope. And it looks as though the where not element is likely to be greenbelt, where there's flood risk and where dispersal would obviously affect villages in a negative way. So I think that's really looking at it in general terms. Michael, Michael Reep, that is, would you like to speak briefly to the plan, and then members can come in with their questions? Michael.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think that was a very useful summary of the position we've got to. We are, of course, preparing our new local plan for a 15-year period, 2023 to 2038. As you said, we've been through some initial stages of consultation last year. Challenges document, which looked at the principal issues facing North Somerset going forward, trying to identify what are our priorities to put into the plan. That was followed up by choices, which is our initial consultation on where the new growth might go, what we call the spatial strategy. We're now beginning to think about, well, how do we refine this further and move towards a proposed preferred spatial strategy? And that is what we're suggesting is going to be in front of the Executive Committee at the end of April. So this is a real opportune moment for SPEDA members to really get some sort of thoughts and feedback and recommendations to Executive Committee about how we proceed to the next stage of the local plan, because the preferred spatial strategy is really important, as it's going to provide the framework, the structure for how we prepare then the draft plan, which we'll be preparing as a council and going out for consultation hopefully at the end of this year. So the report, which is in front of you, sets out the work undertaken to date through identification of the vision through the local plan, the principal issues we've got to address through the planning process, our strategic priorities, what is important to North Somerset in terms of how it applies to our district. Then we set out some of the sort of responses to the consultation, particularly the response to the alternative approaches we set out in the choices document, and also the additional technical evidence which has been prepared or is underway. And that is all going to sort of come together as we agree the next stage, the preferred spatial strategy. And as the chairman said, we're still concerned with broad locations. We're still concerned with the strategic principles, not specific sites. That will come later in the process once we've identified the broad locations about where growth might be located. And as I say in the report, there does seem to be a broad alignment between our strategic priorities, a lot of the technical evidence, and a lot of the response to consultation, and particularly thinking about climate emergency and nature emergency and this council's priorities. And I think there's quite a synergy between a number of these issues as we move forward. So the report sets out the principal issues which are going to have any implications for the preferred approach, and that covers things like we already mentioned, the enormous housing challenge facing North Somerset, and questions about how deliverable that amount of housing actually is. Questions about our approach to minimising travel by car, and there's been a lot of debate about electric vehicles and the role of electric vehicles and commuting. Employment provision, really important about where new employment growth should go across the district. The importance of creating sustainable communities, and also delivering that high quality of design which was mentioned. How do we create great places for the future? A whole question about what's proportionate amount of growth for the rural patch, for the villages. What is the appropriate amount of growth within villages within North Somerset? And critically, how much should we either use or avoid land at risk of flooding in terms of where growth should go? And last but not least, the whole question about the use of the green belt. When are exceptional circumstances triggered, and what sort of development, if any, should we be looking to deliver within the green belt? So the panel's views are sought, and that will help us, and it will help executive to the executive debate at the end of April about the next stage of the local plan, and trying to get to a stage where we can agree the preferred spatial strategy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Michael. Very succinct report. Given all the work that's been put into this plan, you've managed to squeeze it all into 2 or 3 minutes. Congratulations. Right, I've got 3 people wishing to speak or ask questions. I'm going to be sorry, I'm going back to my old profession. I'm going to be the teacher, and there will be certain rules. I don't want any repetition. If a councillor has said something, I don't want anyone saying, "Oh, I agree with that," and I'm going to repeat it. So no repetition, no deviation. I'll accept just a hint of hesitation. But let's get on with things. So, Councillor Codling, your hand is up first.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a minute then. I'd like to offer something to note, if I may, as well as a question. Firstly, just to note, I do applaud the efforts in this consultation. It's not always easy to engage people, and I think we were quite right to add a focus on younger people. But we are, as a council, still almost wholly inaccessible to many people. And we have talked about this before. I'm talking to Councillor Holland about this week, and Councillor James has been really helpful in correspondence on the matter. So I'd just like to raise that yet again, and I will continue to do so ad nauseum, I'm afraid. A question about the consultation itself, Michael. I know we spoke about this at the panel previously about containing the limits of the consultation, because it is, as you've reminded us, very strategic at this point. But I wonder whether, and by its nature, because it was contained, some of the questions it was rather closed, it was prescriptive. But I wonder if anything else was raised by communities that does contribute to the strategic picture, and that fell, with outside of the parameters of questions asked, and also whether you encountered any difficulties, shall I put it, in terms of containing residents' views just now, because I'm sure they were keen to get very site specific, and whether there's a mechanism to carry any of those extras forward to the next stage, if that makes sense.
And Michael, would you like to respond?
Can I respond to that, Chair?
Yes.
Yes. Absolutely. In terms of the consultation, yes, it was a successful consultation, but of course, all consultations are limited to a certain extent in terms of the time and the focus at that particular point. I think it's important to bear in mind this is just the first stage of consultation. We're quite at an early stage of the plan. We're trying to identify the key issues and the broad principles which are applying, and we'll take those on through the plan making process as we go to a consultation draft, out for consultation for that, and then there'll be a subsequent stage of the consultation, and then testing through examinations. There's many stages to go, and it's a bit like going through a funnel. You're gradually sort of increasing the level of detail as we move through. So at the moment, we're trying to talk about broad principles. And yes, we did get a lot of feedback, which we can usefully pick up on. And quite a few people were talking about detailed policies or detailed sites. And we're sort of capturing them and working with them in parallel with everything else we're doing. I should say at this point that there is a consultation statement that's been prepared for this stage of consultation. That's listed at the background papers at the bottom of the document. And it's well worth having a look at that, because that goes into a lot more detail about the response we received and the whole range of different views which were expressed, which we're trying to summarise and trying to aggregate together to try to give us a bit of a steer on the way forward. So yeah, I think they're the main points I was going to make on that.
Thank you. Again, if I can repeat what Michael said, at the end of the paper, there are all of those references to the background work which has produced that document. So if you have nothing to do this evening and the television is offering little, I suggest that you read all of those papers. Right, Councillor James, your hand is up next.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to put on record my formal thanks from myself and Councillor Kieran Connolly for the sterling work done by officers to enhance youth participation in this formal planning process. Also, it takes real leadership to use a position that you're in to empower others. And I just wanted to put on record that Councillor Tonkin has done this throughout. He's created a space where people who have views that don't necessarily agree with his can voice their views and be empowered. I think that was really good. Councillor Cronley and I submitted 24 FOIs to our statistical neighbours. Only 2 of the councils, Purbeck and Charwood, collect demographic data, and collecting this data is the only real way, in our view, that you can actually know whether young people are actually responding to you. So a brilliant job from North Somerset Council on that. We went from having 3 at one point, 3 under 30s being engaged, one of which being me, to 120, which is a huge transformation. It's not good enough. It still means that young people's voices have half the weight to non-young people's voices in terms of responses, but is enough information from young people to be significant and to be segmented. And that's really the ask that I'm giving to executive members. Matt, now it's in your hands. In terms of the recommendations, I would like you to consider the issues arising from the feedback and weight responses from under 18, from under 30s and disabled people giving feedback more, and to really think to yourself, is this a local plan that really includes and empowers those residents? The Brundtland report on sustainable development, which, in this local plan process and in previous ones, to be fair, under previous executive and administrations, we all say we prioritise sustainability, but the Brundtland report really says that sustainable development can't really exist if underrepresented voices, and it does mostly talk about young people, future generations, don't have a voice. So that's the real ask, to if you want sustainable development, do empower and raise those voices in terms of the views that they may express, even if those views don't quite correlate with your own, just because that's really how we create a local plan that works for everyone. That's everything. But thank you very much, and cheers to everyone involved.
Thank you, Hugh. Councillor Bird, you're next, I think. Right.
Thank you. Firstly, as usual thing, talk about the consultation and the results regarding retaining Greenbelt. As far as I can feel, that anybody's response to this is going to be about actually trying to retain green fields rather than Greenbelt, and whether that response to that consultation should really be given the weight that it has in the document because of that. On that note, obviously the government says that any development of Greenbelt needs to be under exceptional circumstances, and our area, being half of it is Greenbelt and half of it is floodplain, is fairly exceptional circumstances as far as I can see. And my thoughts are just how are we going to take this forward to prove, if we do develop on Greenbelt, what those exceptional circumstances are. You know, as I say, I think the county is an exceptional circumstance.
Interesting question, isn't it, about what constitutes an exceptional circumstance?
Exactly.
I'm sure Michael will be able to give us the absolute definitive view on that. It's worth probably emphasising again the point Mike Bird raises. I suspect he's right. There is a general misconception by the public as to the difference between green belt and green field, and we all know when the public speak to us as individual councillors, there's very few people do know the difference, and they seem to think that anything which is green is protected, and don't know actually where the green belt boundary is. But that's not for us to deal with today. But Michael Reap, could you define what would be an exceptional circumstance for us to go into the green belt?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is we're acutely aware of this potential misunderstanding between Greenfield and Green Belt, and we did try hard through the consultation to be clear what was the Green Belt and why Green Belt is identified by the government as being so important. And which does lead to the next question. Yes, in terms of trying to identify sufficient broad locations to meet the housing challenge in particular, we've got to think about capacity, deliverability and overall sustainability of these locations. Now, the government requires us to look at sustainable development in locations outside the green belt in the first instance, so we have to work within the parameters of government guidance, not just about green belt, but flood zone and everything else. So we will need to go through a process now of identifying what is the capacity within, firstly, the urban areas, the brownfield, the urban capacity sites, the repurposing of sites within town centres, etc. We'll then have to look at opportunities at the urban areas to find urban extensions which are well related to jobs, services, facilities, and other requirements. And then after that, we have to think about what are the opportunities elsewhere, other villages, larger villages, rural areas, and also what potential is there in flood zones or new communities within the rural areas. And once we've done that and we've identified where are the sustainable locations, the sustainable opportunities, and consider density and consider brownfield sites, and even talking to your neighbours first, then the government says you can look at identifying sustainable locations in the green belt. So we haven't quite got to that point yet. This is what the spatial strategy is about. It's about identifying what are our priorities, where do we look for where the growth locations are. But there is that question which is coming up very quickly now, is can you meet the requirement outside the green belt? And I think the consultation that we undertook and the scale of the challenge says that is going to be very difficult to do. And in which case, what are the reasons for going in the green belt, and what sort of locations should you look for within the green belt? And that's one of the discussion points which our executive will have to think about at the end of April. So the answer is we know the process we've got to go through. It's about identifying the capacity within all these different locations, and coming to a view about whether you use flood zone or not, what is sustainable in the rural areas, what isn't sustainable, and then you can have a look at what your housing requirement is, and on the back of that you then judge whether the exceptional circumstances have been met, and then think about what sort of opportunities there are in the green belt.
So
it's not a clear answer, and there never is a clear answer to this, but that is the next stage of the process.
And what we're not doing then at this stage is saying absolutely there will be no development in the green belt, because it might be that the figures will turn out where we have to seek incursion into the green belt, but that is not yet there for us to decide, is it? Does that answer your question, Mike?
Yes, very good. Thank you, Michael.
Councillor Bridger, Steve Bridger.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I'd like to welcome the report. I think it does a really good job, actually, of succinctly kind of capturing the journey so far. So thank you to Michael and the officers for that. A couple of quick points. One on evidence base. I think in a previous briefing, we've obviously there's a tension obviously between the housing targets that are set for us and the actual housing need in the area. And I think it's been raised before, I think, about a local housing needs study about, how much affordable housing we need, care, home provision, and so on. I'm not quite sure where we are with that piece of work, whether it's finished, whether it's still in process, and whether how that's factored in. And I think that's something that should be made public and published with all the documents around the local plan. And then another quick point about design. Chair, you mentioned it at the beginning of this item, as did Michael. It's obviously there's a movement by government to strengthen design as well, isn't there? And if communities are going to be accepting more housing, obviously they're more likely to be willing to accept that if the houses are well designed. My first job actually in Somerset County Council in the 80s was delivering posts around County Hall in Taunton, and I used to deliver posts to the County Architects Department. I think at the time when 40% of the architects in the country were employed by councils, would you believe? Obviously the government have just recently published, or MHCLG have published the National Model Design Code, I think last month before, which as I understand it, provide sort of some guidance notes for us basically to develop our own design code. Maybe, I don't know whether that will be in the form of a supplementary planning document or whether it's factored into the local plan itself. But I just wanted to know, or to ask, how we were going to actually take all of that design, all the design element to this on board in terms of the local plan itself. So that was one question. That the local housing needs study was the first one. Thanks, Chair.
Michael Reap, response.
Yes, the first point there was about the housing study, and we're working with the West of England on what is called a local housing needs assessment, and that takes the government's standard method, the sort of government's requirement for us to test, and looks then at what that means for the district in terms of the different categories of need: elderly persons, affordable housing, different types and size of housing. That piece of work is well underway and should be reporting very soon now, and we hope to have that before the executive meeting at the end of April. In many ways, that will then inform our next stage of work in terms of our detailed policies and our approach to what's the proportion of affordable housing, what's the proportion of elderly persons housing, and where should that go. And that will be part of the more detailed assessment moving forward, but it is important at this stage in terms of spatial strategy, agreeing the approach. The other thing about design, that's really interesting. A lot of emphasis from the government on design now, not least the white paper which was out last year, which was talking about a whole different approach to planning in terms of zonal planning. If you remember that, identifying zones of growth, and within these zones of growth there'll be sort of background documents about design codes and how we apply design codes. And we've got a lot of thinking to do as a council about how we gear up to delivering that, because it's absolutely right. We've got to try and make sure that whatever development comes out is the best possible in terms of urban design and its function that we can make it.
Thank you.
And that will be within the local plan, a mixture of policies in the local plan and more detailed design statements to follow, and SPDs potentially further down the line. Sorry.
Thank you, Michael. Councillor Crosby, Mark Crosby.
Thank you, Chair. We already have a number of speculative applications landing on the council's desk at the moment. So what I was interested in is at what sort of indicative point does the emerging local plan's aspirations have comparable or greater weight than the existing plan when it comes to appeals? Is that a long way off, or is it something that we can move towards fairly promptly? I don't know.
Yeah, the principle is that as you move through the planning process, your policies get refined and through the consultation stages, and they get more weight in the jargon. However, I still think we're a little bit off that point yet, because at the early stages of the plan, the local plan doesn't have much weight. By the time we've got a first consultation draft out at the end of the year, that will hopefully give a good steer, and that will have a certain amount of weight, but it's not a great deal of weight yet. It really only starts to require weight once we go through the stages. So I think the first point where we can actually point to emerging policies, of course, will be at the end of this year with the consultation draft, and then as it goes through the stages, then and it continues to get tested and refined, it gradually increases in the weight we can accord it at appeal.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Councillor Crew, Peter Crew.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I suppose Michael has covered some of those points, but the one thing we have to be mindful of when we talk greenbelt and green fields, and I understand there is confusion over that, but of course we have this problem that matching the housing number together with the land available becomes more of a problem for us. And the other situation is we go to consultation, which is fine, but we seem to need to find a way to encourage our developers, which have already got planning permission, to try and increase the amount they build. Because while we're going through this process of the new forward plan, we have to bear in mind that a lot of these applications were really cleared years ago, and still they're very slow at building. Now, builders will tell you, well, if we can't sell them quick enough, we won't build them. We have to find a way to encourage that forward. And then at the other extreme, if we find at the end we don't have enough land and we have to look greenfields, green belt and so on, that developers don't come straight in and take the advantage of going straight for the green areas rather than brownfield sites. So it's just a precautionary thing we need to be clear on. Thanks, Chairman.
Michael, given that we are currently reaching 808 dwellings a year, do you have any figure you could give us to show what that would be if all of those given planning permissions were acted upon?
Well, it'd be significantly higher than that. We have got a lot of planning applications on the books, which are ready to go now. I think that the question is more about the builders build houses. We don't build houses. We have got to make sure that we put the right mechanisms, the right permissions, the right context in place to enable them to undertake the developments. But we do need to understand the issues that the development industry faces and the obstacles that they face, and see if we can overcome them. And some of them might be down to the local authority in the way we deal with the application and the development process. Some which will be deal with marketing constraints or financial, the way that the markets operate. And there might be other obstacles away, but as well in relation to particular sites or particular locations or viability of particular sites. I think we just got to understand that, because once we get our local plan together, we got to make sure it's not just a paper plan, that it's a developable plan, that it is capable of being delivered. And as part of that, we need to understand what the various factors are which are affecting how quickly houses can be constructed.
Thank you. Richard Kent.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, it's just a quick point, just to follow up on Councillor Bridges' query about design, and to add to what Michael said, there's a piece of work going on across the west of England about a placemaking charter for exactly that reason. It's to look at the quality of design and placemaking across the west of England, and a number of councillors will have been involved in that with Design West. So it is something that we're very actively thinking about.
Thank you. Yes. Councillor Havison, Karen.
Thank you. Yes, I've got quite a specific question, and it may not be appropriate for discussing the local plan. It may be more an issue for an SPD. But as I understand it, we have currently a policy where renewable energy developments are not permitted in the green belt. Again, a green belt issue, and also not in the AONB. And I was wondering whether that could, I mean, that obviously wouldn't clash as much with the greenbelt policy as building houses there. So I was wondering whether that could be relaxed. Thank you.
Michael or Richard?
Yeah, I think that's one of the policy areas that is on our list to look at and revisit as we go through the more detailed policies within the local plan, and we are aware of the issues there. The policy in the green belt doesn't say you can't, but then we've got an SPD which does say that wind farms and solar PV are going to be quite unlikely within the green belt. So there might be a case of revisiting that and getting a further discussion about our approach to renewable energy.
Thank you. There are no other hands up. So what I propose doing now is, having taken into account everything which has been said at previous meetings and this meeting, we've got 4 recommendations that I would like to seek your approval for, so that we could send them up to council. So is it possible to have this put on the screen, Michael or Richard or Leo?
I can probably do that. No,
rather than me just read it out, because I don't think that's the best way for people to hear things. If not, I can read out.
Can you see that?
There it is. If I could just go through it. I mean, I don't normally like reading things, but screens can be very small. So the recommendation would be in these 4 categories. Priority should be given to locating new residential and mixed-use development in or close to urban areas where there is an existing or proposed wide range of facilities, services and jobs, and where there are opportunities to encourage active travel, particularly at locations which are currently or have the potential to be well serviced by public transport, well served by public transport. So that's the first idea. Secondly, employment opportunities should be encouraged at accessible locations well related to the urban areas and on sustainable transport corridors. Thirdly, residential development in areas at risk of flooding should be avoided outside the towns. Fourthly, the amount of development at villages and in the countryside should be minimised and, where permitted, should relate to local community needs. I think that encompasses everything which people have said. Michael and Richard, I'm tempted to throw a 5th one in, but seek your thoughts. And the 5th would be worded something like, there should be an expectancy of high design standards. Would either of you object to that going in?
No, Chairman, I think that's sensible. I think at this stage we're looking for some guidance on what the spatial strategy we should recommend the executive should be, and I think the words here encapsulate that. It certainly doesn't do any harm whatsoever to flag up the importance of quality design.
Okay, so I'm recommending that we send that to the. Does it go to council or to executive? Would you remind me of the process?
Executive,
then council. Okay. Karen, is your hand still up, or have you just not put it down?
No, I've just put it up again.
Okay.
I was just wondering. Sorry, could we just add to the design and energy efficiency? Because that is part of the design, but just to specify it.
Is that not included?
Chairman, if I may, that might be helpful as a sort of like a follow-on recommendation. So rather than sort of like a 0.5, but it's a further observation that the local plan as it comes forward should focus on energy efficiency.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
As a sixth addendum.
Well,
Yeah,
rather than number 6, yeah, or it's just a separate standalone point.
Or yes, as part of 5, there should be an expectancy of high design and
energy efficiency.
Standards. Yes,
That fits together, doesn't it?
High design standards and energy efficiency, and yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Anybody object to that?
No, second the lot, Chairman.
Okay, right. I've just got Councillor James wants to speak first, so it's proposed and seconded. So Hugh.
Yes, no real points for guessing what I'm going to ask. Mostly just in terms of the an additional recommendation. Can the point that essentially that youth engagement and underrepresented groups inputs towards this value more highly in this stage and in future stages, can that sort of be taken forward in some sort of formal way, or
I wouldn't have thought
it's
so.
not a specific.
I would have thought that was more of a question of process rather than what we're trying to establish.
Yeah, it's very much process rather than spatial, so that's fine.
Yeah. I would recommend that we leave it with these 5 recommendations. That's proposed and seconded. Anybody wish to speak further to that? Do we need a formal vote on this? Is that the way we must proceed?
I think it would certainly formalise.
Okay, right. Could I, to make matters easier, could I ask if any member wishes to vote against this? Please raise your hand. No. If any member wishes to abstain from this, please raise your hand. No. We can therefore ipso facto declare it having been passed unanimously to the executive. Thank you all very much. Thank the officers, and we will proceed from here with the next tranche of discussion on the local plan. Thank you all, and particularly thanks to the officers for all the hard work you've put into it. Fine. We now move on to item number 7. Wyndham Way. Which officer is going to? Alex. I think this is your baby, isn't it? So off we go to Portishead, and Alex Hearn will show us. Could I just say before we do? Are we now approaching the stage where we might be able to start speaking to other human beings rather than just staring at screens? And if so, one of the things I would love to do is come up to Portishead and with the Portishead members go around this site so I can learn a bit more about it on site rather than by just staring at a screen. So if Portishead members will welcome me into their midst, I'll come up as soon as the law allows me to. So
you're allowed to as of 2 days ago, Chair.
Right. Okay. Alex, over to you.
If you wouldn't mind, I'm really sorry about this. I think my wife is locked out. I just need to go and let her in. I will be 30 seconds. I'm really sorry.
We will allow the Deputy Director to go and attend to his wife, and then well, this is
impeccable timing.
Is this going to be one of those meetings which goes viral because a senior officer had to leave to let his wife into the house?
Then it depends if she comes back.
Alex is now back. Right.
I'm really sorry about that. School pickup, return from school pickup.
Right.
So thank you very much. I think today's a really good time to bring this paper and the appendix, having just been through the discussion on the progress of the local plan preparation. I think this is an opportunity to consider some of those issues in relation to a particular geography, obviously. The issues about early engagement, using exemplary design right from the start of that engagement, and to consider the use of brownfield land and mixed use development, mix of tenures and densities. So taking on the previous discussion and then really thinking about what that means in localities. And quite often our discussion around growth is about things like green fields and impact on the green belt. Well, this is about brownfield land. So effectively, the paper is to report progress on a joint exercise of engagement and placemaking that's been taken forward by Portishead Town Council, North Somerset Council, local business representation, and then some particular landowners in Portishead in the form of Aberdeen Standard Investment. So the paper sets out some recommendations that hopefully are clear to you. These are about the process of the exercise and the issues that the exercise has been considering. And then, so obviously I'd like to invite the panel to consider these without of course prejudicing your views at all. If you are supportive of the process and the exercise, it'd be really useful to note that. So very, very briefly to summarise the content of the report and the exercise we've been through or are going through. Of North Somerset Council officers towards the end of sort of 2009 sought to facilitate a collaborative process in a location where there have been some really quite difficult discussions about a particular planning application. As we know, growth and change is emotive and challenging. Those discussions have happened and are happening, and I think this has proved to be an opportunity to really proactively engage with some of the issues, the challenges, and the opportunities that come with growth in towns, and in this case in Portishead. The process has been designed to be split into two phases. Today, the report in front of you effectively signifies the end of the first stage, and within this there's a suggestion that we move into a second stage and we progress that in the coming months. Generally, and certainly at a strategic level, national planning policy and our current development plan is supportive of more development in Portishead. Now, that's because there is brownfield land near to and in planning terms, much of it within the town centre. It's accessible. There is land that is next to where a new station is planned. These are all the ingredients that, from a government policy perspective and good planning, is deemed to be a sustainable location for development. And of course, as the station becomes more of a likelihood and a reality, then landowner interests and developers are going to become more motivated to develop. So it's really, really important that the planning process and those of us that are actors in it, including local communities, walk towards those challenges and come up with a plan and a framework to help coordinate decision making over the coming years. Portishead has grown very rapidly over the last 20 years, and I and the rest of us involved in this exercise absolutely get that, and that's why it's really important that, bearing in mind the characteristics of Portishead, that we do a good piece of early planning to help provide that sort of decision-making framework in future years. So the report, the stage 1 report, which is an appendix to the cover note, effectively comprises of study area, a proposed study area, some analysis around some of the issues there, including some quite technical analysis from specialists in relation to things like flood risk and transport and ecology. It proposes a vision, and that vision is very much set around the notion of connectivity. It sets some objectives and then a set of principles for some of the issues and opportunities that can be faced and engaged with through what would become a more propositional second stage. So it sets a framework for a second stage piece of work, and then a process of how we deliver that second stage. So that's effectively a summary of the paper. Very happy to answer any questions you have on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. First hand up is Portishead member, Hugh James.
Yes, and I'm also on the Wyndham Weds steering group, just as a not pecuniary interest, but just something probably that needs to be noted. But I'll just, as someone on that steering group, I'd just like to thank Aberdeen Standards, Portishead Town Council, and North Somerset Council, and the businesses involved who've been really collaborative. Previous sentiments on the Old Mill Road can be quite toxic locally, but this is a site that can really unlock and connect Portishead. It can tackle the problems we have. It can deal with what to a lot of residents feels like the scars of previous development. It will be a flagship project, and it needs to be treated with the respect. We've been talking about brownfield sites and sites in near urban areas. This is really all the things that we're talking about and discussing in our future local plan being put into action now. Other areas, like for instance Bristol with its Temple Quarter and Western Harbour, huge developments that local communities don't really feel like are done alongside them, and nowhere near as open and as fair in their ambition as this project. I think stage 2 will be really interesting in terms of the engagement process that's being done. I think hopefully the change that we should notice is that local communities do feel like they have a voice in this, and that they do feel like the early engagement that we're putting into this is worthwhile, and it's a Portishead plan, not just Aberdeen Standards plan. So I just wanted to thank Aberdeen Standard for their sort of changed approach, and for Portishead Town Council and members of our community for really thinking carefully about not just saying no more development because we've got problems and we need to deal with that, but actually thinking about, well, if there is development, if we have to have development, this is how we should do it. There have been sort of concerns raised that this project could kill off the high street, which are false. They're false because what the high street needs is higher footfall, and it needs nearby residents. And if we do have some residential development, it should really enhance Portishead High Street, and really this should really be a project that protects our high street in that sense. There've been concerns that Portishead's overbuilt, but this is, as I say, this is brownfield land, one of the largest brownfield sites we have available in North Somerset. When you ask people where they want to build, they will say brownfield sites. So that instinctive feeling that brownfield sites where should be prioritised really shows that here's an area that we need to look into and invest in. It's a really special project that we've got going, so I'd just like to give my full endorsement. Obviously I am on the steering group, but I'm on the steering group because I'm passionate, and all North Somerset councillors seem really passionate about this, as do Portishead Town Council. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugh. I noticed the Portishead Town Council is meeting on, is it Wednesday the 17th, when it's discussing this. Are those meetings Zoomed or?
They are teamed.
Teamed rather than Zoomed, okay. I think I ought to be in the audience and see how the conversation goes. So if somebody could let me know before the meeting how to get into it, I would happily listen to what the Portishead people are saying on this development. So perhaps you'd let me know how to
email the clerk after this meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Councillor Bridger, Steve Bridger.
Thank you, Chair. Very, very briefly, I don't represent a Portishead ward, but I just wanted to applaud the initiative really as a model, as a piece of proactive placemaking, Alex. So fantastic. I mean, I think the words you use. I mean, I often talk about to my community about leading into challenges. I think the words you used were like walking towards it, which is kind of, same similar thing. I think, I think, I can perfectly understand why in the past people, recoiled from some planning applications, from some of the thought of more development, when there's no vision, when it's without any context. And I think if people can see the vision, they're of course they're more likely to buy into it, and as Hugh was saying, feel part of it, a sense of ownership, and perhaps want to be engaged with it even more. So I think it's a great piece of work, and I applaud everyone who's been involved with it.
Thank you. There's a telling paragraph in the report from Alex, and I think it's worth reiterating. He says, while planning clearly has a fundamental role to play in shaping and leading change, development happens because of investment decisions and deliverability and viability. And that really shows how collaborative development has to be if it is going to be successful. We councillors can discuss until the cows come home, but we'll achieve nothing unless we do it in collaboration with those who are able to cause this development to take place. So that, I think, is the telling paragraph, how we've all got to be in it together. Great. There are no other hands up on this. So, Alex, the lead you want from us is to say, yep, go ahead. This is going in the right direction, and thanks for reporting it to us. Is that satisfactory?
In a nutshell, yes, please.
Okay, yeah. Right. That's what we will. Well, who am I to say that's what we will do? That's up to the members. Does anyone object to that process?
No, it's all fine.
Okay, that's what we will do then, and I look forward to being able to learn a bit more about Portishead's ambitions, if I can sit in and listen to the town council discussion, I'd happily do that. So, right, thank you very much. That moves us on to the parking SDP, item 8 on the agenda. Which officer's taking us? James has appeared. Is James taking us through that?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Yes. Okay. Right. It's a lengthy document. Please don't read it all to us, either James or Jack. Let us assume everyone has read it, thoroughly understood it, inwardly digested, and you can give us a précis, and then it's open to members to question and challenge. Does that meet with your approval? Right. Which officer wishes to speak first?
Yes, if I can go first. I'm James Wigmore, Lead Transport Planner for Highways and Transport Development Management. And also with me is Jack Wyatt, Transport Policy Officer, who's been leading on the review. If we can just run through the presentation. So I'll just refer to the Parking Standards Spd, because obviously it's a very lengthy title for a document. And it sets out the council's approach to vehicle and cycle parking in North Somerset, but it also includes electric vehicle charging infrastructure provision. And what it does, it seeks to ensure appropriate minimum levels of parking at new developments and to promote highway safety. So it's used by agents, developers, members of the public and internal officers to assess the planning applications. And it also contributes to the wider council priorities, the climate emergency and the ambition to be carbon neutral by 2030. We will need to go into some level of detail just because parking is an issue that is very contentious. So forgive me if we do have to get into a bit of detail, but you'll have to stop me if it's too much. The current standards were adopted in 2013, so they're well overdue for review. There's outdated policy references, for example, and we've already seen policy developments elsewhere in highways and transport, so the active travel strategy and the highways development design guide review. So progress to date, we've produced a revised draft, and that has been circulated for internal officer consultation at the end of last year, and we've we've revised that in line with the feedback, and we're now seeking approval to go to the executive committee for a public consultation on the document. I'm just going to hand over to Jack to run us through the parking discount assessment. That's one of the big changes.
Thanks, James. So yeah, as James mentioned, one of the main updates we're proposing is the introduction of what we're calling a parking discount assessment. And the main aim of this is to recognise that different areas of North Somerset require different levels of vehicle parking, and on this basis to enable a reduction in the number of parking spaces required in accessible locations that are less reliant on private vehicles. Car ownership, for example, varies quite considerably across North Somerset. The figures for Central Western is an average of 0.65 vehicles per household, and this compares to up to 1.9 vehicles per household in places such as Winford. And it's important that our parking standards reflect this variation. Currently, our standards are a bit unusual in that we have just one set of vehicle parking standards for the entire authority area. And although our standards do permit deviation where appropriate, we don't really have any consistent methodology of doing so in areas where car ownership may be lower. And this is the proposed, the purpose of the parking discount assessment, which looks to build on this and provide a clear and robust assessment to identify where in North Somerset we may permit reduced parking standards. So the idea would be that developments in locations well served by active and public modes of transport that are less dependent on private vehicles and experience lower vehicle ownership would receive an appropriate reduction in the minimum number of vehicle parking spaces required. And this will help facilitate developments in accessible locations that are less dominated by private vehicles and encourage higher density developments, which is really something we need to be doing in tackling the climate emergency. So as I've mentioned, the proposals can help contribute towards our ambition to be carbon neutral and deliver on some of the primary objectives outlined in our emerging active travel strategy, including most obviously tackling the climate emergency and improving air quality by reducing reliance on fossil fuels and car dependency, shaping active travel neighbourhoods through an enabling planning system that promotes active travel communities that aren't so reliant on private vehicles, and also achieving the health and social benefits associated with higher active travel and less car dependency. So we've actually based this assessment on similar assessments currently in use by Baines and a variety of other authorities nationally. And this is quite an established means of reducing parking requirements in appropriate locations. The assessment will act as a guide for both developers and internal officers as to the level of parking we may consider acceptable in development proposals. So proposals would be scored against a variety of criteria in order to receive a reduction in the number of parking spaces required. And you can see a sample of the assessment on the right-hand side of the screen there. The residential assessment comprises 21 questions, and the non-residential comprises 14. And these include criteria such as walking distance to the nearest bus stop, walking and cycling distance to nearest educational, retail and medical facilities, and also the quality of pedestrian and cycling facilities in these locations. There will be various levels of discount available, as shown on the bottom of the screen, which ranges from very low, 0 to 5% discount, to very high, which would be a 65 to 95% discount. And there will be further points available for proposals that include measures which reduce reliance on private vehicles, for example, shared e-bike schemes and the provision of a car club vehicle. So we have actually tested this on quite a wide variety of sites across North Somerset. rural sites, such as Blagdon Water Gardens, overwhelmingly fall within the very low category, and are entitled only to a 0 to a 5% discount in the standard. And this is obviously reflective of the heavy reliance on private vehicles and the lack of available alternative modes of transport in these locations. Locations on the outskirts of our towns, such as the Nailsy Upland site or Gordano School, for instance, in Portishead, tend to fall within the low to moderate category and are generally entitled to a 10 to 15% reduction. And this reflects the fact that access to local facilities and alternative modes of transport are better, but they will still be largely reliant on private vehicles. It's only really in our town centre locations where car ownership is considerably lower and there are better links to local facilities and public transport options where more significant reductions will be achievable. And there are differences between our town centre locations, which is again reflective of their respective levels of public transport links and local facilities. The B&M site in Clevedon, for instance, scores moderate and could achieve a 15 to 25% reduction. The Old Mill Road site, with the delivery of the Metro West service in Portishead, would score moderately high and be entitled to a 25 to 40% discount. And the Town Hall in Weston, which is actually our highest scoring site, would achieve a discount of 40 to 65% in the minimum number of parking spaces to be provided. In terms of what this will actually look like in practice, so using the example of 10 4-bed dwellings in Old Mill Road, Portishead, with the delivery of Metro West, our current standards would request that a minimum of 30 spaces be provided. Under the proposed 25 to 40% reduction, this could be reduced to a minimum of 18 to 23 parking spaces, which would need to be provided. It is important to note, however, that these reductions will not be forced upon developers and they can provide additional spaces if they wish, but it does offer them the choice to build higher density, lower car development in the right locations. And it should be noted that where a reduction is to be permitted, garage spaces and rear parking court spaces won't count towards the parking requirement. And this is on the basis that research shows less than 50% of garages are actually used for parking, and a similar percentage of rear parking court spaces remain unused if on-street parking is available. So by not counting these spaces towards the standards, we're really ensuring that where a discount is permitted, parking spaces remain usable, and we don't push vehicles into parking in appropriate locations, such as on footways or near junctions. Thank you, James.
Thank you. So we're proposing to introduce a low car development principle. So the current standards require a minimum of 1 car parking space per dwelling in all circumstances. This would be replaced with the low car development principle, which would support low car developments in sustainable locations, and it should allow a wider variety in the types of development and giving a choice to those who want to live with fewer or no cars. But obviously it will be subject to justification in line with the parking discount assessment, and should be noted that nowhere in our district would currently meet the very high criteria, so allowing more than 65% of discount of parking spaces. And also disabled bays, delivery bays and emergency vehicle access must still be provided at all sites. Also worth noting that developers are not required to reduce the parking provision, but will have the option to do so in suitably accessible locations. Okay, next slide, please, Jack. We are also introducing Principle 19, electric vehicle parking.
which sets out to future-proof new development by ensuring that sufficient electric vehicle parking provision and infrastructure is provided in both public and private parking areas. Our current SPD, for instance, only encourages developers to provide electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and we obviously need to update this in line with developments, both in national government policy towards EV provision and also our ambition to be carbon neutral by 2030. In line with this, our revised SPD sets minimum requirements for EV provision at new development, and this is based on recommendations set out in a 2019 report commissioned by the West of England authorities. It also includes best practice guidance and a suggested layout diagram pictured on the right-hand side of the screen there, which was provided to us by the Energy Savings Trust.
And we're proposing to introduce Principle 20, which is for car club schemes at new developments. The current SPD makes no reference to car club provision. And the revised SPD states that car clubs must be considered at new developments and that the council may secure their provision via planning conditions or Section 106 agreements. And also that these car clubs should be served by an electric vehicle next to an electric vehicle charging point wherever possible. Next slide.
So we are also making a variety of updates to our cycle parking standards. Most significantly is the increasing of the minimum number of cycle parking standards to be provided at residential development. We've also made various amendments in line with recent government guidance, including the gear change strategy and local transport note 120 cycling infrastructure design, which provides sort of more detailed and good practice guidance for cycling infrastructure at new development. We have also introduced a requirement that 5% of all cycle parking be provided for non-standard cycles to accommodate people with mobility impairments. And this is obviously to ensure that cycling remains accessible for everyone in North Somerset. And together, you know, these changes to our cycle parking standards clearly contribute towards our active travel strategy and also our ambition to be carbon neutral by 2030.
And then finally, some general updates to policy references within the SPD, and specifically to include, excuse me, parking standards for gyms, houses of multiple occupancy, holiday lets and swimming pools, which aren't currently included. More flexible garage dimensions, but they require the same gross floor area. And a small increase in parking bay dimensions to be in line with trends emerging nationally. And then we're ready for questions, if that's okay, Chair.
I think, Chairman, your microphone's muted.
Thank you. I do apologise. It's 148 pages of material to read on this topic. So members will have either read it word for word, or they will have at least speed read some of it. I'm open to questions and comments, because I think a lot of this is probably being thrown at us in a way where, if we were in a different environment, if we were all in a meeting room, we would probably feel more at ease discussing things rather than staring into screens, where we tend to feel we must make statements rather than hold conversation. And there's a lot in this report I would love to go through officers with, but I don't somehow think Teams or Zoom is perhaps the right way to do it. But that may be just me. If I could kick off, one of the biggest complaints I get as a local member is about the lack of parking spaces, not about the over provision of them, and I think that's a reality for most councillors. Certainly, living in the Victorian centre of Weston, there is a a perceived problem of parking on streets where so many properties have been divided into flats, and there are more and more cars being parked. I also, I'm very cognizant of certain developments on the outskirts of Weston where parking standards were so low that even though they're modern developments, residents are constantly annoyed that they cannot park properly. But I appreciate that life is changing. It's even changed for me. I've become a committed e-biker, and so my car is now seldom used. But I'm not sure that's happening to everybody. But we'll see. Three people now with two people with questions: Mike Bird, then Peter Crew, and James Wigmore to come back. So, Mike, let's see how this conversation goes. Mike Bird.
I'm interested to know how you're going to calculate the parking spaces allocated and what you call a parking space. The reason why I'm saying this is the fact that recently in Nailsea we've had at least 3 developments who've turned commercial premises into flats, and there are no parking spaces allocated at all to the flats. There is a permanent parking, which is the North Somerset car park near, but there are no parking spaces for the flats. How does that work? Because obviously that's 100% discount using your terms.
Yes, are you happy for me to come back on that, Chair?
Right. Well, let me throw another one in then on top of Mike Bird's comment. There was a development adjacent to the Madeira car park in Weston-super-Mare for a block of flats. It provided no parking provision whatsoever. The previous council threw out the plan. It went to an inquiry and the inspector overruled the council, allowing the development because he said there was a municipal car park nearby and people could park there. We've since had another development come through which will have no parking. The idea that simply because people are living close to a town centre that they won't have cars is a fallacy, isn't it? I mean, if you live in a city, London, I mean, I don't have any friends now in London who own cars because it's just so impossible. And on the other side, of course, the equation, public transport is so good. In Weston-super-Mare, we're not like that. The development isn't as dense and the public transport is nowhere near what you would expect in a city. So it does present problems. Peter Crew, Mark Crosby. Right, good. We're keeping the conversation.
Yeah, we also have to look.
Chairman, could I just briefly interrupt? Could Jack stop sharing the screen, because of course it's not great for the web stream and members
yes.
might find it hard to see each other. Thanks.
Thank you. We can now see each other. We're happy.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think also we need to take on board people's behaviour. We looked at last time this was done, as we said, 2013. There's not many developments currently underway that's even working to those standards. If we go back to the previous 2 standards, and we can take Lock and Castle, for example, Westwick, places like that, there is still a problem even at those standards. And to give you an example, the thing that worries me, there's a development in Weston where in the space of 18 houses, there's 42 vehicles parked. A third of those vehicles are commercial. We don't seem to be able to control that. There used to be a rule that if people went home in their working vehicle, their company had to provide a space where it could be left. But now you have people with their own private cars and a commercial vehicle at their house. And as of yesterday, for example, between those 18 houses, 10 cars were parked half on the pavements. So we do need to be mindful of the fact that much as we would like to see this and ease the restriction and reduce the number of parking spaces, which I don't have a problem with as we develop forward with more people wanting to move to using public transport. We don't have that facility at the moment. The worrying thing is, if we change these standards now, it's fine, but we could be looking at 10 to 12 years down the road before these properties are built, which of course gives us a problem that if we didn't get it right, by the time we get these properties being built, we're thinking, oh, we were wrong there. I mean, we've already got that situation in Westwick, that our highways department are now looking at doing road improvements to roads which have only been laid in the last 10, 12 years. So we do need to, I agree with the way forward, but we do need to be mindful of the way we do it. The most important thing is I'm glad we've taken on board that we don't count garages as parking spaces, because you're quite right. If you look at a lot of places now which had actually carports, they've actually put doors on, turned them into garages for storage. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, Pete. James and Jack, do you want to respond individually or wait until every member's spoken? I don't mind.
Would it be possible to respond now? Because I've already noted
please,
about
yes.
three
Whatever's
things
easiest for you. Yeah.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair. So the first thing to mention is that Locking Castle and Portishead Port Marine developments, where we are aware that there were significant problems, which is why the 2013 parking standards were introduced as a result of those issues. Those developments were permitted under maximum parking standards, where at the time I understand the government was pushing maximum parking standards to sort of discourage car use, whereas the standards we have now are minimum parking standards. So we're not in the same situation. We are saying these are the minimum number of parking spaces that need to be provided. And what was mentioned about, if I just go to Madeira, the development next to Madeira car park, what we're proposing won't change the existing situation with parking under provision. So where you have got, say, a derelict hotel which has a planning use as a hotel, let's say it had 100 bedrooms, and our standards would require it to have 100 parking spaces. If it has 0 parking spaces, then it has an under provision of 100. So therefore, if you turn it to 50 flats, and 50 flats only require 50 parking spaces, they will not be increasing the under provision, they'll actually be reducing it. And there's nothing that we can do in planning terms about that, as I understand. So what we're talking about is new developments on sites where there isn't an existing sort of planning use, and the same would go for industrial developments. So if it was offices and it had no parking and turned into housing which had a lower parking requirement, then the current standards or these standards wouldn't change that situation. Talking about, Councillor Crewe mentioned about garages, and the report that North Somerset Council did into Locking Castle and Port Marine did identify that only 40% of garages were used at Locking Castle, and only 50% at Port Marine. So it's well recognised that that was part of the problem, because if every dwelling has a garage and only half or less are used, that creates an overspill. And in addition, there were rear parking courts which people are reluctant to use. So only 50% of those were used at Locking Castle. So where we are seeking to enable a reduction in parking standards, parking courts wouldn't be considered as parking spaces, and certain rear parking courts wouldn't be considered as parking spaces, and neither would the garages. So you go from a situation where Locking Castle was approved with 2.8 parking spaces per dwelling, but as many of those were garages and rear parking courts, if you knock out the proportion that weren't used, it goes down to 1.2 spaces per dwelling. With the discount we're proposing, Locking Castle would result in 1.5 to 1.7 usable spaces. So it just shows that the reality of knocking out, not including parking provision that is unattractive and doesn't get used, the result that has. Thank you, Chair.
We're back to the issue of urban design, aren't we, which we were discussing some time ago. So thank you, James. I've got Mark Crosby, Hugh James, then Karen Havison. So in order, Mark Crosby.
Thank you, Chair. James and Jack, thank you very much for this. One of the things that I was particularly interested in was your assessment on the B&M proposals in Clevedon. And I think I and my fellow Clevedon members would very much welcome a briefing from you on how you achieved that particular assessment figure, if that's possible. One of the things that I'm minded of so often in these conversations is that I think it was one of the Nordic countries, it might have been Denmark or Sweden, that actually increased VAT on cars to 120% in order to encourage single car ownership. And in return, they ring-fenced the money that was achieved from that for public transport. And I noted in the Hydrock report that they submitted with respect to the B&M application that they acknowledge the consensus data from 2011, that's the data that they're using, for England, shows that public transport in South West in particular is below average for England. So I think if we're going to do this, we have to find some way of driving towards more public transport. And if that has to in some way come out of the developers' pockets, which it did used to, then we need to press harder on that for that.
Problem is, as I understand it, Mark, I mean, there's an optimum density of population, isn't there, below which public transport is pretty poor and above which it gets better. So that if you go into a metropolitan area, into London, into Paris, into Strasbourg, you don't actually need a car. But you try telling many people in Weston-super-Mare, particularly in Clevedon, the new developing areas, which are divorced from the town centres, have no public transport links. You try telling people they should exist without a car. Yeah. It's a difficult one to sell, isn't it? Yes. As much as we might philosophically believe in it, the practicalities sometimes make it very difficult.
Yes, indeed.
James and Jack, do come back, please, if you want to. I mean, we're trying to get you to respond to us as well.
Can I come back on?
Jack, yes, please.
The Clevedon B&M site. Sorry, I butted in. So although that is a town centre, very clearly a town centre location, you'll note that it's only rated as moderate, so 15 to 25% discount. So before, well, with our current parking standards, it says in that we can discount parking in suitable, sustainable locations. And I've had various conversations with developers who've said, well, this is a town centre location, it's sustainable. Well, clearly from going through the assessment, Clevedon B&M site isn't a particularly accessible location, and therefore it doesn't score particularly highly for discount. I think that was, and then the other discussion was about sites on the edge of Weston with no public transport. Well, they won't score very highly on the assessment, so they may not qualify for much discount whatsoever. But it will then be in the developers. It will be an option for the developer to say, right, well, we want to get this score increased. Therefore, we can propose various improvements to the public transport, for example. We could propose car clubs, e-bike sharing schemes, but without, if they're not prepared to put in those measures, then and their sites score very low, then they won't be eligible for any discount anyway.
Okay, yep, understood. Hugh James. Then Karen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Like you, most of the communications I get from residents are about the lack of parking rather than too much parking. And here in Portishead, people do seem to be well aware of a sort of parking deficit we have. I just wanted to say on electric car spaces, really welcome trying to bring in these sort of new innovations for especially higher density places. It seems ridiculous that we've got a lot of blocks around here. This is Portishead East rather than my ward, but so many blocks around here where there aren't electric car spaces, which seems very short-sighted of the developers. But there we are. Things move on quickly. As someone who tried to find somewhere to rent across the area, I found it amazing how many areas that I had to discount just because there was nowhere suitable to that I could safely put my bike, or never mind a bike trailer, just feel that I could safely put a bike. So I really welcome those changes with bicycle parking, and really hope that we can make sure that they actually do stay in all policy. When it comes to the parking point, though, I really urge you to listen to bus operators when making these policies. The minimalist approach to parking when Port Marine was set up sort of created barriers to reducing parking. The fact that people locally, they don't have places to park, so they park on the highways, means that you can't get public transport, which means that more people park because more people need to have a bike. So that's sort of where poor policy at the very first stage of developments can really be counterproductive. But that's bygone past, but it's something to sort of raise. And the only other thing that I wanted to mention is I really oppose creating these concrete villages that we do, in terms of when you have high density areas, having allocated spaces can lead to silly situations where people like myself and my cousins choose or can't drive. So we have a wasted bit of concrete that's never used in terms of land, whereas our neighbours have too many cars and they can't use. So some sort of way to recognise that allocated parking for large urban developments isn't always the way forward. Is something that I really urge the council to recognise, a way that you don't have to have so many spare spaces where people choose not to park, and that really might impact the price of renting and living too. So it was a bit jumbled, but those were just the comments I wanted to feed in, Chair.
Thank you, Hugh. Either James or Jack want to come back, or I'll go on to Karen. No, Karen have something.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, James and Jack. I really welcome the direction of travel you're proposing, and I think it's a bit of a chicken.
Do you mean that, Karen? Direction of travel?
Direction of cycling and walking. Yes, I mean, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? We do want to encourage more active travel. We do want to discourage car travel. But where do we start? We want to provide more public transport. So we need to start somewhere. And this is where we as a council can start. We can't start at the other end, as I understand it. And this is going to be a plan which will take us into the future. And when I this is not for this year or next year. This will go further forward for several years. And if I look at the average age of us councillors, with the big exception of one of us, and the average age of the officers who've developed this plan, then I can see where we're going. And if even John can cycle with his electric bike, then this is where we need to go.
I'm not at the graveyard yet.
Especially John. But the UK is very far behind in its transport system in terms of using more cycling and public transport, and we basically need to push in the right direction. So I really welcome your plan. I think it's a great plan. Thank you very much.
Right, so we'll have a push in the right direction from Karen. Thank you. Okay, and then Steve Bridger.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I had a wry smile actually when I saw that we plan to increase the size of parking bays by 10, 20 centimetres. So certainly in the Atom we've got an absolute epidemic of large SUVs and pickup trucks, which I wish we could do something about, but of course we can't. I hope that changes at some point soon. I wanted to ask too, not just about the number of spaces, but the nature, the location, and what they look like. So, can we, certain developments, or certainly, for example, proposals for things like new medical centres, it might be. I don't like to see huge expanses of tarmac. If we can sort of encourage developers to use grasscrete or things like that, I think that would make a difference. Likewise, certain development might lend itself to having parking spaces around the periphery of a development to make the actual livable spaces more pleasant to be in. But I don't know whether that is within scope of this SPD or whether it's really, to be discussed with individual developers around specific sites. But I wouldn't mind a view on that. Thanks, Chair.
Any comments from James or Jack on that?
So just say about the standards we've got don't stipulate sort of the surfacing of the parking spaces, and I'm not sure whether that would come down to design, but it's certainly something we can consider. Whether we refer to grasscrete, we sort of suggest the types of surfaces we'd require. I think, so I'll make a note of that. Thank you, Councillor Bridger.
Okay, I see no other hands up now. Advise me if I've got this wrong, but the purpose of the meeting of this on the agenda today is that we release this for consultation. This now goes out for consultation, so you're not actually seeking at this stage the scrutiny panel's approval of it. We're approving it for consultation. And then could you advise me, after a period of consultation, will the results of that consultation come back to us and we then consider that and it goes up to the executive, or does it go straight from consultation to the executive? I'm not quite sure of the process.
So as I understand, we're seeking approval from the executive on the to go to the executive on the 28th of April to go to public consultation, and then we would sort of, based on the feedback, revise it further. And I'm not an expert, but I would guess it would come back to this panel. Yeah, Colin.
I see Colin Meader's hand has gone up, so he will either help us out or throw a spanner in the works. Colin, over to you.
I think what James has said is right. I would expect it to come back to the panel. If you recall, Chair, we did the consultation recently on the active travel strategy, and we brought that back to the panel. Obviously, it depends a little bit on how the response to the consultation goes, and whether we think there needs to be a lot of changes to the document, or whether it's a modest number of changes. I just, while I've got the microphone, if I may, Chair, I just want to just remind members, obviously the conversation has focused a lot about the discount tool, but there are other aspects to the parking standards as well that I just want to make sure are captured around cycle parking and EV parking. But on the cycle discount tool, if I may say, it was quite interesting that it was sort of, the debate often seemed to be switching between lots of parking or no parking, but actually what this is a discount tool. So at no point does it say there will be no parking related to the development. What it's trying to do is getting the right amount of parking for the right location, and that's what that discount tool is trying to do. And I think most people would agree that the amount of parking you need in a deep rural area is quite different to what you might need in the centre of Weston. You then can have a debate about how much discount there is, and I accept different people will have a different view about that. but I just think it's helpful just to remind members that, you know, this does allow for parking in all situations. It's just the minimum amount will vary depending on other factors, and that's what this is trying to get across. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. That puts it nicely into context. Right, there are no other people wishing to speak, so I'm going to presume, unless anyone objects, that we're happy for this to go forward as a document for consultation. We're not endorsing it, but we're not objecting to it, but we will expect it to come back in due time with the results of that consultation, and then we will consider it further. Are members happy with that?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. Fine. So if you're all happy with that,
yeah.
Okay, we'll send, and thanks James, Jack, and Colin, and I hope you appreciate that my bike has been with me in part of this discussion. Okay, thank you very much. Now
I'm getting closer.
The next item, let me just see, item 7. Yes, the works panel, and this is where I think Leo will probably come in. Final item.
Thank you, Chairman. Before we get into the work plan, there are a couple of items that have been proposed for consideration under the work plan. The first of which is an update from Jessica Harper, the Sustainability Coordinator, to update members about the Creating Sustainable Buildings and Places SDP. And the second item relates back to the active a briefing that was held on the 18th of February for all members on the active travel strategy. There's an appendix to the work plan which I will refer to later. But if you'd like to deal with the first of those two, the item on the Creating Sustainable Buildings and Places SDP, which I believe Jessica is waiting to provide.
Right.
An update.
Is Jessica with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Right. Okay. Right. We've got this here. This has gone, or this is going to public consultation now as we speak. Correct?
Yes, it's currently out for consultation until the 26th of March.
Okay, could I ask in future that when we have documents going for consultation, we actually have them come before the panel before they're released for consultation, rather than picking it up after it's been published? Okay, if you would like to discuss this now, perhaps let members know what we're talking about. Thank you.
Okay, so if I just provide a very brief overview, I think that the panel was sent the consultation, a link to the consultation, which of course sets out the detail of why we're consulting on the SPD. I think it's sort of the rationale is sort of similar in some parts to the update to the parking SPD. The original SPD was adopted in 2015. And of course, since then, the council has declared a climate emergency, and we have the ambition to be net zero carbon by 2030. So that really has driven the review of the SPD, because of course, as part of the climate emergency, we need to be moving towards net zero carbon new development. Now, we are developing a new local plan, and that will set out, or certainly strive to set out, a policy which will be net zero carbon or as close to zero carbon as possible. But that won't be adopted until 2023, I believe, at the earliest. So this, the updated SPD is our sort of requirement to set an interim improvement through actually reinforcing and actually confirming that we wish to use the current adopted policy, which is core strategy CS2, which is the sustainable design and construction policy, to require all new residential development to demonstrate a percentage improvement on energy performance. Now, we haven't done that for a number of years. We've just relied on building regulations because there was a shift in national policy direction, which sort of indicated that local authorities couldn't do that. But ourselves, much like other local authorities, now recognise that we are able to actually ask for percentage improvement. So because we have that requirement within adopted core strategy policy, this really just sort of restates our view that we will require a percentage improvement, and this is very much alongside and in addition to the existing requirement, which is for all new development to demonstrate renewable energy provision. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach to sort of improving new build residential development over and above national policy, which is set out within building regs. And it's very clear that we can do that. It's set out within the Planning and Energy Act, but there was a lot of uncertainty that government sort of threw at us sort of between 2015 and perhaps a couple of years ago, which sort of suggested that actually local authorities couldn't set these standards. But luckily, at the beginning of this year, the Future Home Standard, which some of you may be aware of, that's sort of the direction of travel. And that actually did clarify that local authorities can set these standards. So that's what we intend to do. So there's that part of the updated SPD, which is really important. But we've actually taken the opportunity through updating the SPD to actually update a number of other areas. And that includes sort of stronger links to other related policy. And that includes the green infrastructure and the new green infrastructure strategy, the active travel strategy, the forthcoming waste strategy. Lots of things were in development. And so we try to pull it all together to actually demonstrate that these are all of the sort of things that need to be demonstrated in new development. And as part of that SPD, there's a checklist that actually all developers need to fill in to demonstrate that they are complying. And of course, that's sort of reinforcing that they need to be submitting energy and or sustainability statements to demonstrate that they have complied with these levels. So yeah, so I think it's probably going to be easiest to sort of take questions. But as I said before, the consultation's underway. It's due to run until the 26th of March, and very much depending on the outcome of the consultation, we hope that we will be able to adopt the updated policy at the April full council, but it all depends on the result of the consultation. So it's kind of wait and see, but it certainly goes some way, and sort of, as I say, a sort of stepping stone towards sort of our direction of travel. And I'm sort of involved in lots of meetings which look to how we can actually really greatly improve on current standards and sort of adopt net or close to net zero policy going forwards. So yeah, happy to take any questions.
You're muted. Chair, you're muted.
I do apologise. Thank you, Karen, for reminding me. I'm taking this largely as an item for information because it's not on the agenda proper. We've managed to squeeze it in. So in future, please, can we make sure that items like this are on the agenda and that anything which is going for public consultation comes to us before it's released for consultation? Because I mean, none of us on the scrutiny panel have a clue what has been put out into the public arena. I think we need to take ownership of all documentation before it goes out. So, Karen, did you want to speak, or you were simply reminding me that I was being a very bad chairman? And
I was simply reminding you. Right.
Okay. For a year, I suspect that the most popular phrase in the country has been "you're muted." Hopefully, we'll soon be out of that phase. So, are members happy just to receive that for information, and then we'll hear further back? Is that okay from the officer's point of view?
Absolutely, yeah. And okay. Apologies for the oversight that it didn't come to the panel previously.
it's just a minor telling off, as it were. Write 100 lines by next week. That'll be okay.
Noted
Okay,
for the
then.
future.
I think that concludes the meeting.
Chairman,
Leo.
just one further item. Just referring members to the appendix at the end of the work plan. I'll quickly go through it. Members will recall a briefing was given to them on the 18th of February on the active travel strategy. At that meeting, the members present were minded that a recommendation to go back to council indicating the panel's support for the strategy, and in particular for the number of areas in which that strategy was strengthened following the consultation. So really, this is really just to pick that up and to seek members' endorsement that I put forward a reference to council indicating their support for that it be adopted.
Anyone object to that?
No, fine.
Right. Steve Bridger, is your hand up?
It is, Chair. Yeah.
Right.
The
floor is yours.
Thank you. So by the way, in Coco last week, I forgot to unmute myself twice. You've done the same, so we're equal.
3 times.
Stop it, Peter. Yeah, I wanted to raise a point. It's not on the work plan, Chair, but I just wanted to know whether we were, but I'll raise it now, whether we were going to get some visibility of the output from the planning peer review that we participated in a month or 2 back, because obviously there's some things that officers, I assume that we received a report. There's some things that officers just need to think about.
Who can answer that? Richard Kent, probably. Yes, Richard.
Thanks, Sam. Yes, we are indeed just receiving the final report. So there was some interim findings, but the final report has come in, and just today, in fact. So we'll be in a position to provide feedback to you on that at your next meeting, if not before that.
Okay, thanks. We look forward to receiving the report on how good we've been or how bad we've been. Right.
I think, Chairman, it identifies areas that we've been good and areas that we could be better.
Right. Sounds like a school report, doesn't it? Yes. Okay. There's nothing else on the agenda. I think we've covered everything. We don't have any other business. Right. Nothing else. So, and we've done it good. We've done it under 2 hours.
Good timing, Chairman.
I thought it was going to be longer. So thank you all for your participation, and I really look forward to being able to meet with you sometime in the not too distant future. I think I've had my fill of screen work, but there we are, needs be and all that. So thank you all very much, and
thank you, John.
See you at the next time.